Saipan, 9th of July 1944. Shortly after 2 p.m, a Marine Corps combat cameraman filmed the American flag being raised over the newly captured Marpi Airfield. To the exhausted Marines watching below, it seemed the battle for Saipan was finally over. Just a few hours later, the man who captured this film was dead. But how did a young Marine cameraman, recommended for the Navy Cross, survive one of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles, only to lose his life at the point of victory? The clues lay in the very footage he left behind. Together we'll explore his film, wartime maps, official records and eyewitness accounts to piece together his final journey across Saipan and discover what those forgotten reels still have to tell us. This is the remarkable story of Corporal Howard McClue. Before we can follow that journey, however, we first need to understand why thousands of American Marines were fighting for an island few had ever heard of. In the summer of 1944, the Mariana Islands formed a critical part of Japan's inner defensive perimeter. Capture Saipan and the United States would not only split that perimeter in two, but gain airfields from which B-29 superfortresses could strike the Japanese home islands for the first time. That made Saipan one of the most strategically important objectives of the Pacific War. Taking it, though, would come at a terrible cost. Our investigation begins 3 weeks earlier. Among the thousands of leathernecks ordered ashore were 2 Marines carrying cameras instead of rifles. 2 men who could hardly have been more different. Corporal Howard McClue was 19 years old. Raised in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, he'd enlisted in the Marine Corps just 2 months after finishing high school. An Eagle Scout with a passion for photography, Saipan would be his first experience of combat. Beside him was Sergeant William Homer Gnaus. At 37, he was nearly twice McClue's age. A gifted photographer who had even taught cinematography at the Marine Corps Photographic School, Gnaus was one of the Corps' most proficient combat cameramen. Despite the difference in age and experience, the 2 men quickly became close friends. Over the next 24 days, they would eat together, sleep together, and film the battle side by side. Only one would leave Saipan alive. On the morning of the 15th of June 1944, McClue and Gnaus came ashore with the first waves of the 25th Marines on Yellow Beach. Their mission was straightforward enough: establish a foothold, drive across the island, seize Aslito Airfield, and help cut Saipan in two. The reality was anything but. Japanese machine guns, mortars and artillery swept the beaches, cutting down Marines and pinning others only yards from the shoreline. Combat made no distinction between rank or role. Among those hit was Bill Gnaus, concussed by the blast of an exploding shell. Throughout those landings, Howard McClue kept filming. Among the first scenes he captured was a platoon of M4 Sherman tanks grinding ashore through the surf. At first glance, they appeared to be little more than another wave of reinforcements. In reality, they arrived at one of the most critical moments of the landing. The 25th Marines had been pinned inside a shallow beachhead while determined Japanese counterattacks threatened to drive them back into the sea. These Shermans, Company A, 4th Tank Battalion, helped break that deadlock. By the evening of the 15th of June, the regiment had secured a foothold on Saipan. For Howard McClue, however, the battle was only just beginning. With the beachhead secured, the Marines could finally begin the advance inland. On paper, it was a simple operation. In reality, it meant fighting across open sugarcane fields, overlooked by steep ridges, where tanks, infantry and artillery would have to work together if the attack was to succeed. Howard McClue's camera captures exactly that. Filming from the front, he records one of the earliest examples of Marine tanks and infantry operating together in a Central Pacific combined arms assault as they attack the slopes of Finasusu Ridge. Working in this way, the Marines slowly forced their way across the island. 3 days after the landings, troops of the Army's 27th Infantry Division captured Aslito Airfield, splitting Saipan in two and achieving one of the invasion's principal objectives. McClue's next reels reveal a very different side of the campaign. Instead of firefights, his camera records long columns of frightened civilians emerging from the sugarcane. Saipan was home not only to Japanese settlers but also Koreans, Carolinians and native Chamorro people. Most offered no resistance, but many had spent years being told that the Americans would torture or kill them if captured. The 25th Marines Action Report notes the capture of several military prisoners and many civilians on the 20th of June, placing McClue's camera near the village of Tsutsuran. One of McClue's reels captures a brief but touching moment amid the fighting. A Marine machine gunner pauses to give a young child a piggyback ride. At first, he's just another anonymous face in the crowd, but by comparing McClue's footage with photographs taken only a few feet away by Sergeant Robert S. Gamble, including civilians wearing the same distinctive clothing, we can identify him as Private First Class Robert Earl Benson of George Company 25th Marines from Tampa, Florida. It's a small discovery, but it proves something important. Howard McClue's footage can be matched to other surviving evidence, allowing us to place both people and events with remarkable precision. That becomes invaluable because McClue almost never dated his reels or recorded where they were filmed. Take this sequence. A colossal explosion erupts beside the airfield, sending a huge mushroom cloud high into the sky. At first glance, it could have been filmed almost anywhere on Saipan, but once again, the evidence tells a different story. The distinctive shape of the blast appears in photographs taken independently by Marine Corps photographers Sergeant Theo Hios and Corporal Nick Ragus, as well as Army cameraman Stephen Ditzian. Their captions date the explosion to the 22nd of June. Cross-reference that with the records of the 27th Infantry Division and another piece of the puzzle falls into place. Demolition teams were destroying a large cache of captured Japanese aerial bombs and torpedoes at Aslito Airfield that afternoon. For the first time, we can place Howard McClue at a precise location on a precise day. Knowing the date and comparing the angle of McClue's footage with the surrounding terrain, we can place his camera atop Hill 500, a commanding position occupied by the 25th Marines on the 22nd of June. The view from the summit explains why the hill mattered. Looking through a telephoto lens, McClue filmed across the Cameraman Peninsula, where the next phase of the battle would soon unfold. Without realising it, he had also given us one of the clearest indications yet of exactly where he was standing. A week into his first battle, Howard McClue had crossed the enemy-held island and climbed one of its most fiercely contested positions. Let's pause right here for a moment for a word about this video's sponsor, Ver Watches, who, as it happens, love history just as much as we do, and that passion is reflected in each of their designs. They have a whole range of military and history-inspired watches to choose from, each with its own unique story, but this has to be one of my favourites, the C5 Korean Field Watch. Inspired by the service watches worn by Allied soldiers during the Korean War, it combines the classic military look with modern practicality. It's solar-powered, so just 6 hours of daylight provides up to 6 months of power, while the scratch-resistant domed sapphire crystal, screw-down crown and 100 meters of water resistance make it a watch that's built to be worn every day. My favourite detail, though, is the engraved caseback depicting the Korean Peninsula, a subtle tribute to those who served during the conflict. I wear my Ver on a daily basis, and I'm not just saying this, they're a quality brand. They're robust, understated, incredibly comfortable, and in my opinion, exactly the sort of watch that never goes out of style. So if you'd like to support us and the people who make videos like this possible, be sure to check out the link below. So, back to the action. Following a week of bitter combat, men of the 25th Marines were finally pulled into reserve for a well-earned rest. During that time, McClue continued to film, turning his focus towards events around the recently captured Aslito Airfield. Among the wreckage sat a remarkable collection of abandoned Japanese aircraft, including 11 Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters and a Kates torpedo bomber. Several were intact enough to be shipped back to the United States for technical evaluation. One of those aircraft may still survive today. The ultimate fate of every machine captured on Saipan isn't certain, but A6M 061121, which once flew with the 261st Kokutai or the Tiger Group, is currently undergoing restoration. 80 years after Howard McClue filmed it, the aircraft may yet fly again. But in July 1944, there was little time to admire the trophies of victory. The campaign was entering its final phase. Within days, the 25th Marines were back on the move, pushing steadily north along Saipan's eastern coast. Between the 2nd and the 5th of July, they fought a series of bitter actions around Charan Tarahoho and Hills 721 and 767. gradually forcing the Japanese into the island's shrinking northern pocket. By the evening of the 5th of July, the regiment reached Galapera. From here, the final drive to Marpi Point would begin. On the following day, the 25th Marines resumed the advance, their next objective the commanding heights of Mount Petsukara. Howard's camera allows us to follow them from there. By now we've established that McClue's footage can be matched to the historical record. This sequence lets us go a step further, not only identifying the day, but almost exactly where he was standing. The attack began at 9 AM with the regiment's 1st Battalion advancing across the flat coastal ground. According to the official history, 13 tanks from Company C, 4th Tank Battalion preceded the sweep. Those tanks are immediately recognisable. Mounted across the rear decks are large cylindrical canisters. Originally used to carry petrol, they had been converted to transport water for the infantry, a distinctive field modification unique to Company C. Then another detail comes into view. Painted across one tank's fording trunk is the name Ironside. That single word tells us we're looking at 1st Platoon of Company C. Suddenly, the footage becomes far more than a record of the battle. Knowing which platoon Howard was filming and comparing the surrounding cliff line with the modern satellite imagery, we can place McClue alongside the 1st Battalion 25th Marines advancing on Mount Petsukara. The advance continues beneath a constant barrage of fire. As the infantry pushes forward, Howard's camera captures another remarkable glimpse into the way the Marines were learning to fight in the Central Pacific. One sequence shows a forward observer speaking into a handy talkie, while another Marine grips a telephone handset mounted to the rear of a Sherman tank. It looks unusual because it is. That handset connects directly to the tank commander, who relays target coordinates to warships waiting offshore. It's an ingenious, if rather cumbersome, chain of communication pioneered by Company C, allowing naval gunfire to be called down onto Japanese positions hidden in the cliffs above. Then Howard's camera catches something altogether unexpected, another cameraman. He's filming only a few feet away. Is it Bill Gnaust, back in action after recovering from his concussion, or is it Private First Class Angelo Abramo, another Marine Corps cinematographer who accompanied the regiment? The evidence is frustratingly inconclusive, but let us know what you think in the comments. While Gnaust left surprisingly little identifiable footage from Saipan, Abramo filmed many of the same scenes. Even the camera itself, possibly a Kodak Cine Special, isn't enough to settle the question. But whoever stood behind that lens captured something extraordinary. For just a few seconds, the camera turns toward Howard McClue himself. This is the only known moving image of him on Saipan, crouching calmly in the middle of the battlefield, filming through the eyepiece of his Cine Kodak fitted with a telephoto lens. It's also the last known image of Howard McClue. By the evening of the 8th of July, the 25th Marines had fought their way beyond Mount Petsukara and were closing in on the northern tip of Saipan. The regiment had paid dearly to get there, but after more than 3 weeks of relentless fighting, many believed the end was finally in sight. They were wrong. From this point, Howard McClue's camera could only tell us part of the story. To reconstruct his final hours, we have to turn to another witness. Just weeks after the battle, Sergeant Bill Gnaust wrote a deeply personal letter to Howard's parents, describing everything he could remember about that final day. Sunday morning, 9th of July 1944, was warm and bright. I awoke first and built a small fire and made coffee. After Howard got up and had morning chow, he attended divine service while I checked over my gear. We left the command post early and with Bob McNally made our way up to the line to join the advance, which was to wipe out all organised resistance on the island. Accompanying Howard and Bill that morning was Corporal Robert E. McNally, 23-year-old scout from Albany, New York. With an outstanding service record and extensive reconnaissance training, there could have hardly been a better man to guide the two cameramen through the final advance. The question now was, where did they join the battle? By this stage, Howard's final reel gives us enough evidence to work it out. The 1st Battalion 25th Marines advanced across the high ground in the centre, while the 3rd Battalion swept along the coast towards Marpi Airfield from the east. That leaves the 2nd Battalion, whose route the official history describes as a deep and wide draw between the high ground and Mount Marpi, ideal country for tanks. This is exactly what Howard films. First comes Inquisitive, a Sherman from Company C, 4th Tanks, and a platoon mate of Ironside, which we've already identified earlier in the advance. Then another familiar name appears, Hothead 3, the command tank of Company B, 4th Tank Battalion. Company B normally supported the 24th Marines, the regiment advancing immediately to the left of the 25th. Piece those clues together and the picture becomes remarkably clear. Howard, Bill and McNally were almost certainly accompanying the 2nd Battalion 25th Marines as it advanced through the draw towards Marpi Airfield. The battle was almost over. Japanese resistance was collapsing across the island, yet only a short distance away one of the Pacific War's greatest tragedies was unfolding. Hundreds of soldiers and civilians were throwing themselves from the cliffs at Marpi Point, or being driven to their deaths by fanatical officers and soldiers convinced that capture was worse than death. Howard must have known something extraordinary was happening nearby, yet whether through circumstance, distance or personal choice, his camera never turned towards the suicides. And finally, there are signs of hope. The flag goes up over Marpi Airfield at 2 p.m. A Japanese soldier surrenders, stripping off his clothing to show he isn't hiding any weapons. An oil dump erupts into flames. By 3:40 p.m, the 25th Marines have reached the cliffs at the northern tip of Saipan. There was nowhere further to advance. With their film stocks running low, Gnaust and McClue packed up their cameras and decided to go exploring. Accompanied by McNally, they worked their way around the base of Mount Marpi. Critically, they saw no Japanese forces. Here's Gnaust. We advanced around the end of the island to join the forces which were driving up the other side to meet us. We three were out in front and made the first contact with the 2nd Marine Division, a tank which had advanced in front of their infantry. This was likely Amapola of the 2nd Tank Battalion. The tank commander asks for help clearing a nearby farmhouse where he suspects Japanese troops are hiding and then promptly hits a mine, taking the tank out of action. Although neither McClue nor Gnaust had been trained to assault buildings, there was little choice. Together with McNally, they investigated the farmhouse and, as Gnaust later recalled, found and killed 10 or 12 Japanese soldiers before infantry support arrived. Now low on ammunition as well as film, the trio decided to head back towards headquarters. Gnaust placed the time about 4 p.m, almost exactly when American commanders officially declared Saipan secure. However, as the Marines liked to joke, the Japanese were always the last to get the word. The three men began retracing their steps northwards, keeping close to this narrow railway line running along the base of Mount Marpi. For a few minutes, everything was quiet. Then, as they passed approximately this location, rifle fire cracked from the hillside to their right. We were attacked by a group of about 15 Japanese soldiers who fired on us at a distance of 200 yards, Gnaust wrote. At first, the Marines thought they were being fired on by friendly troops. Then the Japanese charged. We hit the deck and sought what cover we could, Howard on my right and McNally on my left. We knocked down several of them on their way down the slope, and the rest of them sought shelter and firing positions behind some rocks 50 to 75 yards in front of us. They were in a desperate position. 3 lightly armed specialists, 2 cameramen and a scout, critically low on ammunition, pinned behind a railway embankment with open cane fields at their back. McClue and McNally made the decision to break contact and find reinforcements or more ammunition. Gnaust stayed behind to provide covering fire. I was so busy I didn't notice at first. I called for them and got no response. I thought they might have been hit, so I stayed to make sure the Japanese wouldn't get them. For what felt like an eternity, Gnaust held his position, alone. Then, through the smoke and dust, he saw Howard. McClue was emerging from the cane fields, leading a group of about 20 Marines directly towards the enemy position. Relief washed over Gnaust, until a bullet tore through his leg. In the chaos of the renewed firefight, Howard turned back towards the Japanese to support the arriving Marines. It was the last time Bill Gnaust ever saw his friend alive. The firefight was short but vicious. The Marines eventually disengaged and pulled back. Only later did they realise that Corporal Harold McClue was missing. The next morning, a patrol found his body in the cane field, not far from where the ambush had begun. Lying around him were the bodies of 9 Japanese soldiers. He was 19 years old. Harold McClue's final stop on Saipan, described by Gnaust in that letter to his parents, was the 4th Marine Division cemetery. His grave is near the shore where we first set foot almost a month before. It's a beautiful spot, and time will soon erase the scars of war, as I hope it will ease the pain in your heart. Corporal Harold McClue experienced only one battle in his short life. He filmed it from beginning to end. We can only imagine what passed through his mind each time he looked through the viewfinder of his camera. Saipan must have seemed like another world, even without the violence unfolding all around him. Today, the fragments of his work survive in the National Archives at College Park, Maryland. But they're more than a remarkable piece of wartime film. They're the last surviving record of how one young Marine experienced the Battle of Saipan. And though today Harold McClue's story is almost unknown, his bravery at the time was acknowledged, if not fully recognised. Recommended, along with Bill Gnaus, for the prestigious Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor, his family instead posthumously received the Bronze Star with Combat V device, a small consolation for the loss of their only child. That we know so much about him as we do today is thanks in no small part to his close friend. In that letter to Howard's parents, Bill Gnaus reflected on the impact of that loss. You probably know that Howard shipped out with me and that we were in very close contact from the time we left Quantico until his death on Saipan. We worked, ate and slept together through the whole miserable campaign, and his passing has taken something from me which can never be regained. There's one final tragedy to this story. Bill Gnaus recovered from his wounds in time to take part in the invasion of Iwo Jima, where he filmed the raising of the American flag atop Mount Suribachi, one of the most iconic moments of the Second World War. But he never knew the significance of what he had captured. On the 4th of March 1945, Sergeant William Homer Gnaus was killed by machine gun fire during fighting on Iwo Jima. His body fell into a cave which was subsequently sealed by explosives. He's still there.